There's a moment in life that reveals who you are. It does not happen on a battlefield. It does not happen when everyone is praising you, when the room is kind, when your name is spoken with respect. It happens in a much smaller place. A kitchen table, a hospital hallway, a family gathering, a phone call that comes at the wrong time, a conversation where someone looks you in the eye and says something unfair, something careless, something sharp, and suddenly, inside your chest, something rises. Heat, memory, pride, pain. A sentence forms in your mouth before you have chosen it. You can feel the words lining up like soldiers. You know exactly what you could say. You know where the wound is in the other person. You know the sentence that would cut deepest. And for 1 second, it feels like power to answer, to strike back, to prove you are not weak, to make sure they know they cannot speak to you that way. But then there's another possibility, a quieter one. You breathe. You look at them. You do not rush to defend yourself. You do not hand your peace over to the first person who provokes you. You let the silence stand between you and the damage you could have done. And in that moment, the world may misunderstand you. They may think you lost. They may think you had nothing to say. They may think your silence means surrender. But the Stoics would have seen something entirely different. They would have seen strength, not the loud strength of ego, not the strength that needs an audience, but the kind of strength that has lived long enough to know this truth. Not every word that rises deserves to be spoken, and not every battle that invites you deserves your soul. You have lived long enough to know that words can build a home, and words can burn one down. You have seen a single sentence change the weather of a marriage. You have seen brothers stop speaking for years over something said in anger. You have seen a grown child carry one sentence from a parent like a stone in the pocket. You have seen friendships crack, not because people did not love each other, but because in one hot moment, somebody chose victory over wisdom. Maybe you have done it too. Maybe there are words in your past you still wish you could gather back into your hands. Words spoken in a kitchen, words spoken in a car, words spoken at a funeral, a divorce, a holiday dinner, a meeting, a hospital room. And perhaps the hardest part is this. At the time, those words felt justified. You were hurt. You were tired. You were misunderstood. You were defending yourself. But years later, life becomes honest with you. It shows you that being right is not the same as being wise. The Stoics understood this. They did not teach silence because they were afraid of conflict. They taught silence because they understood the cost of being ruled by reaction. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and lived with far less freedom than most people today could imagine, taught that no person truly harms your character unless you give them permission. They may insult you. They may misunderstand you. They may disrespect you. But the final injury happens when you surrender control of yourself, when their words command your mouth, when their anger becomes your anger, when their chaos enters you and finds a home. That is why silence is not weakness. Silence is the locked gate between the world's madness and your inner life. It is the moment you refuse to become what wounded you. Imagine a man named Thomas. He is 67 years old, retired now, though he still wakes before sunrise, because the body remembers decades of alarm clocks even after the job is gone. His hands are rough from years of work. His knees ache in the morning. His wife says he moves slower than he used to, but he still insists on carrying the groceries himself. One Sunday afternoon, his adult son comes over with the grandchildren. At first, the house is alive. Little shoes by the door, coffee on the counter, the sound of cartoons from the living room. But then, during lunch, the conversation shifts. Money comes up. Decisions come up. Old disappointments, the kind every family keeps buried until someone is tired enough to dig them up. His son says, "You were never really there when we needed you." The table goes quiet. Thomas looks down at his plate. The sentence hits him harder than he expected. Because he was there, wasn't he? He worked double shifts. He missed sleep. He drove through snowstorms. He swallowed his own dreams because the mortgage needed paying and children needed shoes. His first instinct is to defend the record of his life, to list the sacrifices, to remind his son who paid for college, who fixed the furnace, who came home exhausted and still took the trash out. He wants to say, "You have no idea what I gave up for you." And maybe that sentence is true, but he knows another truth too. If he says it with the anger now rising in him, it will not heal anything. It will only add another brick to the wall between them. So Thomas reaches for his glass of water. He takes a slow drink. He lets silence do what pride cannot do. It makes room. His son looks uncomfortable now, perhaps expecting a fight. But Thomas simply says, after a long pause, "That must have been how it felt to you." Not an apology for crimes he did not commit. Not surrender. Not weakness. Just a door left open. And in that quiet, something changes. Not everything. Life rarely heals that quickly. But the room softens. The son exhales. The grandchildren keep eating. And Thomas, for once, does not allow pain to choose his words. That is where the Stoic path begins. Not in books. Not in quotes. Not in the image of a marble statue staring into eternity. It begins at the table when your heart is burning and you decide not to become fire. The world has trained you to believe that the loudest person is the strongest. Turn on the television. Scroll through the news. Listen to public life. People interrupt each other and call it confidence. They humiliate others and call it honesty. They react instantly and call it courage. The modern world has made noise into a kind of currency. The more you speak, the more visible you become. The faster you respond, the more powerful you appear. The sharper your words, the more people assume you must be in control. But you have lived long enough to know that appearance is often the cheapest thing in the room. A loud man may be afraid. A harsh woman may be wounded. A person who always needs the final word may be carrying an insecurity so old they no longer recognize it. The Stoics looked beneath the surface. They knew that a person can win an argument and lose themselves. They knew that noise can be a mask. Seneca, who lived among wealth, politics, betrayal, and danger, understood that anger often disguises itself as strength. It marches into the room pretending to be justice, but it leaves behind regret, broken trust, and a mind that has lost command of itself. That is why silence feels so uncomfortable. It refuses to perform. It does not announce itself. It does not chase applause. It does not prove itself to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. And because silence does not beg to be recognized, the world often misreads it. But the Stoic does not live to be correctly interpreted by the crowd. The Stoic lives to be governed from within. Think about how many times in your life you spoke, not because something needed to be said, but because your pride could not bear being misjudged. Someone accused you of being cold, so you spoke too much. Someone questioned your motives, so you explained yourself until you felt smaller. Someone challenged your memory, your effort, your loyalty, and suddenly you found yourself opening every private room of your heart just to convince one person that you were not the villain. But ask yourself quietly, how many people have you exhausted yourself trying to convince? How many times did explaining yourself bring peace? How many arguments ended because you finally found the perfect sentence? There's a deep freedom in realizing that not every misunderstanding requires your correction. Sometimes people do not misunderstand you because they lack information. Sometimes they misunderstand you because understanding you would force them to change the story they need to believe. And when that is the case, more words do not create clarity. They create more hooks for conflict. A Stoic does not confuse silence with avoidance. Avoidance is when you hide because you are afraid. Silence is when you remain still because you are free. Free from the need to be admired. Free from the hunger to be right in every room. Free from the old childhood wound that says, if they misunderstand me, I disappear. No, you do not disappear because someone misreads you. You do not become weak because someone underestimates you. You do not need to pour your soul onto the floor for people who only came to step on it. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not emptiness. It is self-respect with closed lips. There's a kind of silence that comes from fear, and there's a kind of silence that comes from mastery. You must learn the difference. Fearful silence shrinks. It lowers its eyes. It swallows truth until resentment grows like mold in the heart. It says nothing because it believes it has no right to speak. That is not Stoicism. That is suppression. That is not strength. That is a wound wearing the mask of patience. Stoic silence is different. Stoic silence stands upright. It sees clearly. It chooses the right moment, the right tone, and sometimes the right absence of words. It does not speak just because anger demands it. It speaks when speech can serve truth, justice, healing, or necessary action. And if speech cannot serve those things, silence becomes the wiser answer. A person over 50 understands timing better than a person of 20. At 20, you may believe every feeling is urgent. At 30, every injustice feels like a summons. At 40, you begin to notice that many battles repeat themselves under different names. But by 50, 60, 70, if you have paid attention, life has taught you something precious. Energy is not infinite. Peace is not cheap. And dignity is too valuable to spend on every passing provocation. The Stoic path to clarity begins when you stop asking, "What can I say to win this moment?" and start asking, "What kind of person will I become if I answer this way?" That question changes everything, because now the goal is no longer victory. The goal is character. There's a small space between what happens to you and what you do next. Most people live their entire lives without entering that space. They are insulted, and they immediately insult back. They are ignored, and they immediately become bitter. They are criticized, and they immediately defend. They are afraid, and they immediately control. They are lonely, and they immediately reach for noise. But the Stoic trains himself to enter the space. That quiet, narrow space where the first reaction rises, but the final response has not yet been chosen. This is where freedom lives. Not in controlling the weather. Not in controlling other people. Not in rewriting the past. Freedom lives in that sacred pause where you realize, I do not have to obey the first storm inside me. You may feel anger without becoming anger. You may feel hurt without speaking from hurt. You may feel fear without letting fear drive the car. This is one of the hardest lessons in life, because the first emotion often feels like the truest one, but often it is only the loudest. Under anger, there may be grief. Under defensiveness, there may be shame. Under silence, there may be wisdom trying to protect you from a word you cannot unsay. The pause allows you to hear deeper than the first noise. And that is why silence becomes strength. Not because nothing is happening inside you, but because something very important is happening inside you. You are choosing. Picture yourself at a doctor's office. You're sitting in a chair that feels too hard, under lights that feel too bright. The nurse has already taken your blood pressure. The doctor enters with a folder. There is a seriousness in his voice, the kind professionals try to soften but cannot completely hide. He explains the test results. Maybe it is not the worst news. Maybe it is not even final, but it is enough to change the room. Enough to make the future feel less certain than it did yesterday. You nod. You ask a question. You hear only half the answer. On the drive home, the world looks strangely ordinary. People are walking dogs. Someone is pumping gas. A teenager is laughing at a bus stop, and you want to shout, "Don't you understand?" Everything has changed, but the world does not stop when our private world trembles. This is one of the great humiliations of being human. Your heart can break while the traffic light turns green. Your life can divide into before and after while someone in the next car sings along to the radio. In moments like this, silence is not about refusing to speak to others. It is about refusing to let panic narrate your life. The Stoic does not deny fear. He sits beside it. He lets it breathe. He does not hand it the pen. You go home. You make tea. You sit in your chair. You do not immediately call every person you know. You do not immediately imagine every terrible ending. You let the silence hold you until your mind stops running ahead into disasters that have not arrived. Then, with steadier hands, you decide the next right action. Call the specialist. Write down the questions. Tell the person who needs to know. Rest. Pray if you pray. Walk if walking helps. But do not let fear turn your mind into a courtroom where the future is sentenced before the evidence is complete. Silence gives you back the present. And sometimes, the present is the only place where courage can stand. In the Stoic life, silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is a discipline of attention. It asks you to notice what is happening inside before you react to what is happening outside. This is why it can feel uncomfortable at first. When you become silent, you begin to hear yourself. And many people are terrified of that. They keep the television on because the quiet asks questions. They keep talking because silence reveals sadness. They stay busy because stillness brings up memories. They fill every empty space because, deep down, they are afraid of meeting the person they have become. But you cannot find clarity while running from yourself. The Stoic path is not a path of numbness. It is a path of honest seeing. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by war, plague, betrayal, and political pressure, wrote private thoughts to himself not to impress the world, but to return to himself. Again and again, he reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not over events, not over people, not over death, not over the opinions of those who speak without understanding, but over your own ruling center, your judgment, your intention, your response. That is why silence matters. Because without silence, you rarely know whether you're responding from wisdom or simply echoing your wounds. A quiet mind can see the difference. A noisy mind only reacts. And as you age, this becomes even more important. Because the longer you live, the more memories sit behind your reactions. Sometimes you're not only answering the person in front of you. You are answering your father, your mother, your former boss, your ex-spouse, the teacher who humiliated you, the friend who betrayed you, the younger version of yourself who was never heard. Silence gives you a chance to ask, who am I really responding to? This person or an old ghost? And in that question, clarity begins. There comes a time in life when you must stop holding a trial for yourself in every room you enter. You do not owe your entire story to every person who has an opinion. You do not owe your wounds to every curious stranger. You do not owe endless explanations to people who have already decided what they want to believe. This does not mean you become cold. It means you become discerning. There is a difference between being open and being available for misuse. There is a difference between honesty and emotional self-abandonment. Some people ask questions because they want to understand. Others ask because they want material. Material for gossip. Material for judgment. Material for control. The Stoic learns to tell the difference. A younger person may feel the need to explain every decision. Why they moved. Why they stayed. Why the marriage ended. Why the business failed. Why the children do not visit as often. Why they no longer attend certain gatherings. Why they changed their mind. Why they are tired. Why they are quieter now. But a mature soul begins to understand that explanation is sacred. It should be given where there is trust, not thrown into every open hand. You can say, that was the decision I needed to make. You can say, I am not ready to discuss that. You can say, I understand you see it differently. And sometimes you can say nothing at all, not because you lack reasons, but because your reasons belong to you. Think of a woman named Margaret. She is 72. For decades, she was the person everyone called when something went wrong. Her sister needed money. Her son needed childcare. Her church needed volunteers. Her neighbors needed rides. Her husband needed peace. Her friends needed listening. Margaret was dependable. Everyone said so. But often, when people call you dependable, What they mean is that you have made it easy for them never to feel your boundaries. After her husband dies, Margaret begins to change. Not dramatically, not with anger, but slowly. She stops answering the phone during dinner. She stops saying yes before checking her own strength. She stops explaining why she cannot attend every event, host every holiday, solve every problem. At first, people resist. Her sister says, "You're different now." Her son says, "You never used to be like this." A friend says, "I guess you don't care anymore." There it is. The old hook. The accusation designed to pull her back into the role that kept everyone comfortable except her. For a moment, Margaret feels the familiar guilt. Her mouth opens. She almost begins the old speech. "I'm sorry, I've been tired. I didn't mean it that way. I still love you. I just have so much going on. Please don't think badly of me." But then she stops. She sits with the discomfort of being misunderstood. She lets herself be seen as selfish by someone who benefited from her self-neglect. And instead of defending her heart, she simply says, "I do care. And I also need to live differently now." Then silence. No courtroom. No begging. No emotional performance. That silence marks the beginning of her freedom. One of the most difficult forms of silence is allowing other people to be wrong about you. Not because you are passive, not because truth does not matter, but because there are moments when correcting them would cost more of your life than their opinion is worth. This is especially hard when you have spent years being responsible. You want the record to be clear. You want people to know how much you carried. You want someone to finally say, "I understand now. You did your best." But sometimes that sentence never comes. Some parents never receive it from their children. Some spouses never receive it from the person they loved. Some workers never receive it from the company that used them. Some friends never receive it from the people they helped. And here the Stoic must face a painful question. Can you live honorably without being fully recognized? Can you remain steady even if no one applauds the weight you carried? Can your character be enough witness for your life? This is not easy. It may be one of the hardest spiritual tests, but silence can become a way of saying, "My life does not become meaningless because someone failed to understand it. My sacrifices do not disappear because no one thanked me properly. My goodness is not dependent on being publicly confirmed. A tree does not argue about its fruit. A river does not defend its direction. The sun does not explain why it rises. And a Stoic soul does not spend its final chapters begging blind eyes to see. You may speak when speech is useful. You may clarify when clarity is possible. But when words become a chain, silence becomes liberation. There is a silence that protects peace, and there is a silence that creates space for love to return. Not all silence is distance. Sometimes silence is the shelter under which another person finally feels safe enough to tell the truth. You may have noticed this with children, even grown children. The more you chase them with advice, the farther they move away. The more you fill the room with correction, the less they reveal. But when you learn to listen without immediately fixing, something opens. This is not easy for someone who has spent a lifetime solving problems. You hear your daughter speak about her marriage, and every part of you wants to warn her. You hear your son talk about money, and you see the mistake before he does. You hear your grandchild describe a dream that seems impractical, and your old instincts rise. Protect them, correct them, guide them, stop them from suffering. But love that cannot be silent becomes control. And control, even when it is born from care, can make the people you love feel unseen. The Stoic understands that wisdom is not measured by how quickly you give advice. Sometimes wisdom is measured by how long you can listen without making the moment about your fear. A person may come to you not because they need instructions, but because they need a steady presence. They need your calm more than your opinion. They need your silence to say, "I am here. I am not leaving. I do not need to dominate this moment. Tell me what is true." Imagine your granddaughter sitting across from you. She is 22. Her world is faster than yours ever was. She lives in a storm of screens, opinions, comparisons, and invisible pressures. She tells you she feels lost. She says she does not know what she is doing with her life. Part of you wants to laugh gently and say, "Nobody knows at 22." Part of you wants to tell her about hardship, about real bills, about work, about marriage, about everything life will teach her whether she is ready or not. But you see her eyes. You see that she is not asking for a lecture. She is asking whether despair is survivable. So you do not rush. You let the room breathe. You ask, what has been feeling heaviest? Then you listen. She talks, at first cautiously, then more honestly. She tells you things she has not told her parents. She tells you about feeling behind, about not being sure she is lovable, about looking at other people's lives and feeling like she is failing before she has even begun. And because you do not interrupt, because you do not grab the conversation and make it a lesson, because you have learned the strength of silence, she keeps going. When she finally stops, there are tears in her eyes. You do not need a perfect speech. You only say, "I have felt lost too. It did not mean my life was over. It meant I was being invited to listen more deeply." That sentence lands because silence prepared the ground. Words spoken in a crowded noise often bounce away. Words spoken after true listening can enter the heart. In conflict, silence can also prevent permanent damage. There are moments when people you love speak from exhaustion, not truth. A spouse says something cruel after a long day. A sibling becomes sharp because grief has made them raw. A friend pulls away because they are ashamed. An adult child accuses you because they are wrestling with pain they do not fully understand. If you answer every wounded sentence as though it were a final verdict, you will destroy many relationships that only needed time. The Stoic learns to ask, is this person revealing their character, or are they revealing their suffering? The answer matters. Some behavior must be confronted. Some boundaries must be drawn. Stoicism is not permission to be mistreated. But there are also times when the wisest response is not immediate correction. It is patience. Silence allows the emotional weather to pass before you decide what is truly happening. A storm at sea makes every wave look like the shape of the ocean. But the ocean is more than its storm. People are like that too. You're like that too. You have had moments when your worst tone did not reflect your deepest love. You have said things badly because you were afraid. You have gone quiet because you did not know how to ask for comfort. You have sounded angry when you were really hurt. Remembering this helps you become generous without becoming foolish. Silence gives you time to separate the moment from the whole person. And that is one of the hidden arts of aging well. To become less reactive, not because you care less, but because you finally understand how complicated the human heart can be. As life moves into its later chapters, silence begins to mean something different. When you are young, silence may feel like emptiness. But later, if you have lived attentively, silence becomes a room where your soul can sit down. You begin to understand why old men watch the morning light without needing to speak. Why older women sit by a window with tea, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is being gathered. Memory has a sound. Regret has a sound. Gratitude has a sound. Grief has a sound. And in silence, you can finally hear them without being ruled by them. You may look back on your life and see things you would change. A harsher word than necessary. A relationship you did not protect. A dream you postponed until postponement became disappearance. A person you should have forgiven sooner. A younger self who was doing the best he could with the tools he had. If you're not careful, the past becomes a courtroom too, and you become both the accused and the judge. But Stoic silence invites another way. Not denial, not self-pity, not endless punishment. It invites honest reflection. You sit with what happened. You learn. You make amends where you can. You release what cannot be repaired by suffering over it forever. Silence becomes the place where the past stops shouting and starts teaching. There's also a final kind of silence, the silence that comes when you no longer need to announce your strength. You simply live it. You answer less quickly. You listen more fully. You choose your battles with greater care. You stop confusing intensity with truth. You stop mistaking drama for depth. You stop handing your peace to people who have not earned access to your inner life. This does not make you distant. It makes you rooted, like an old tree that has survived more storms than it speaks of. A young tree bends wildly in every wind. An old tree has learned the deep work of roots. That is what Stoicism gives you. Roots. Not a life without pain. Not a heart without grief. Not a mouth that never speaks. But roots deep enough that every insult does not uproot you. Every disappointment does not define you. Every argument does not own you. Every fear does not become your master. Silence is where those roots grow. Quiet mornings, slow breaths, unsent replies, pauses before answering, walks without headphones, prayers without performance, journals no one else reads, a hand resting on the table instead of pointing across it, a moment of restraint when the old self wanted to explode. These are not small things. These are the hidden architecture of character. No crowd may cheer for them. No one may know how many battles you won inside yourself. But you will know, and that knowledge changes how you carry yourself. So the next time someone mistakes your silence for weakness, let them. Let them think what they think. Let them underestimate the strength it takes not to answer cruelty with cruelty. Let them misunderstand the discipline required to feel anger and still choose dignity. Let them believe noise is power if they must. You do not need to correct every shallow measurement of strength. You're walking a deeper road. The Stoic path is not the path of the person who has nothing to say. It is the path of the person who has learned that speech is sacred, energy is limited, and peace must be protected. Silence is not weakness when it is chosen. Silence is not surrender when it guards your character. Silence is not emptiness when it is filled with awareness. It is the strength of a person who knows that the world can provoke the body, disturb the mood, challenge the reputation, and test the heart. But it cannot command the soul without permission. That is the quiet power no one can take from you. Not age, not criticism, not misunderstanding, not the past, not even the people who know exactly which words could hurt you. You still have the power to pause. You still have the power to choose. You still have the power to keep your character in your own hands. And perhaps that is what true strength has always been. Not the raised voice, not the final word, not the need to be feared, but the calm presence of a person who has met the storm within and decided not to pass it on. So when life places you once again at that kitchen table, in that phone call, in that tense room where your pride rises and your pain begs to speak, remember this. A weak person is ruled by every impulse. A strong person can stand in silence and remain free. And before you answer the next provocation life sends you, ask yourself one question. Will these words protect my peace or only prove my pain?